I really want to thank you for that song. I kind of wish that you'd told me that before, because I could have saved us all a lot of time. And you said that's the sermon, basically. But I've prepared something, so I'll do it anyway. But please, those words, that sentiment, please keep that at the forefront of your mind as we talk about holding on. And holding on when you don't even want to hold on. You know, the lesson, we had a fantastic Sabbath school lesson. I had great choices today. But in that little room, I don't know, we had a fantastic lesson. And I think it all kind of really, one of the things that kind of sparked my interest earlier on when I was preparing this sermon. The issue that come with just trying to hold on. Let's just bow our heads to God. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you that I'm here. And I thank you that you created the environment, the space that your words are coming through. And I pray, Lord, that I will not mess that up. So, Father, we pray that you'll be with us now as you break your word to us in your name. Amen. You know, I was thinking, it's been a long time since I was here. A lot has changed. A lot of different things have happened in that space of time. There's this little tiny thing called the pandemic. As you know, I'm slightly involved with dealing with some of that stuff. But more than that, so many other things change. Earlier this year, I lost my dad, and a number of you know how important and how seminal my dad was to my life. And losing Dad was a shock. It was a moment where I had to hold on. 8 days later, I lost my father-in-law. So we had a situation where I was one side of the world dealing with my father, Lynn was on the other side of the world dealing with her father, and in the midst of that, just as if that's not quite enough, my mother-in-law is in hospital for emergency surgery. Holding on when you don't want to. You know, things change, things move, and when those difficult circumstances, you take a different view of life. You look at things in a different way. I have subsequently left the job that I was doing. I took a bit of a break for 2 months, which was fantastic, I have to say. This week I started a new part-time role. And I realised that with all of this upheaval, with all of these things that go on, you have these moments in time when you reflect on what's important. You reflect on what you want from life. And I realised as I was going through my own processes, when I was going through my own struggles, that I am not alone in going through that process right now. There are lots of people that are going through things that historically we had taken for granted. In some ways we no longer do. You know, we took for granted things like family, we took for granted things like freedoms, even work itself, or even life. We took for granted, and now things look different. Things are not the same. We have lost loved ones. We have changed careers. People have moved locations to where they work. So people are changing jobs and relationships and homes and all sorts of things as they look for stability and meaning in their lives. One of the things that I was really aware of as I was going through the work and post-pandemic work that I was doing was, whilst the pandemic was difficult, the legacy of the pandemic in some ways is worse. We've got people struggling with mental health, loneliness, anxiety, depression, We immediately followed that with a cost of living crisis where people were struggling just to make ends meet and are still struggling. Our food banks are overrun. Our businesses are broke. Our local authorities have their grants cut to an extent that we can hardly give them the services. It feels really difficult to just hold on. And when we go through all those tough times, when we go through all of those difficulties and the impact that it has on us, I myself find that I am not immune, even though I am blessed, even though I have a good job and a good family and good circumstances, I am not immune from the struggles that mentally I feel as I go through this time. Sometimes I feel like I'm just doing enough to keep my head above water and wrestling with those feelings of frustration, those feelings of despair, being a little bit short-tempered, or my children will say very grumpy, just trying to meet some of life's challenges. And to be honest, the extent to which that has happened has actually taken me by surprise. I thought that I knew myself. I thought I was calm. I thought that I had good levels of resilience. But still, I have found myself surprised at how I have reacted in certain circumstances. And I will tell you this, even though perhaps I shouldn't, because you guys know me well, some of you know me very well. There have been moments in those times that I have questioned, where is God in the midst of all of this? Why is it happening the way that it is happening? I don't say that I don't believe, but I will say that I just don't understand what's going on. And, as I said, for me, it was that whole idea that this wasn't in the script. This wasn't in the script of being a Christian, I thought. It wasn't in the script of trying to say that I'm dedicating my life to Christ. This isn't in the script of just trying to do the right thing and seeing other things going wrong. And even after all of those difficult circumstances, the idea of holding on, was the thing that just kept pressing in my mind. My prayers took a different dimension. My prayers looked different from perhaps what I said before, or the general narrative, or the general I'm going to bed, thank you God for what you've done, or the general please look after me and please could I have. My prayers took on a different way, and suddenly, I would be asking God to fix this situation, or take away this particular problem, or stop this pain or this struggle that I felt that I was facing. As I look at the news and I talk to friends and experience, I realise that I'm not the only one that was doing that. People were asking themselves questions. To put it bluntly, at this point in the world's history, universally, it feels like things are just getting tougher. We've got Israel and Palestine, which is dominating the news cycle right now. But have we forgotten about Ukraine? It's still there, 2 years on. Have we forgotten about the legacies that we've learned in terms of our own internal government, that whilst people couldn't go and see their loved ones dying, those that were in charge of what we were meant to be doing were not keeping to the rules? One of the things that I kind of looked at was, particularly the experience of Leicester, would I be called to the inquiry to say, how did that impact on Leicester? How did those things? But what I do know is people's individual circumstances during those times, during that extended lockdown that we faced, people's circumstances were desperate. And we are still facing the legacy of it. People that are just simply right now trying to hold on. When it's gone out of the news cycle, it is still the news of their individual lives. How do we hold on? How do we hold on when the tensions and trials, the hurts and the hazards seem to be all around us? And I suppose It's with all of those questions springing around and running around my mind that I went back to actually what is an incredible sequence of verses in John chapter 15 in our scripture reading. And that whole chapter really. Now, don't get me wrong, because I know when we read that chapter, it's like love, love, it's all great, love. And to be honest, that's a kind of, without the context, that's the kind of chapter that would slightly annoy me when I was going through my crisis. You know, the idea of, if you love, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to be okay. And maybe I might not have been driven to it quite as much if I didn't realise the context of when those words were actually being spoken. The context of what was happening all around, the chaos that was all around when those words were being spoken. You see, when Jesus was speaking these words, he was in the upper room. Now, this was clearly an incredibly intense time. He had suffered physical attacks. He had suffered verbal attacks. The pressure that was on him at this time was extreme. Even his own disciples were busy arguing and bickering amongst themselves over their own selfish, petty concerns. And isn't that strange? Sometimes when you're in the midst of your tension, your tolerance for people with small, petty concerns, it annoys you. And Christ was in that situation. So all of this was around him. And ahead, he knew what was coming down the line. It wasn't like, okay, tomorrow is going to be better. He knew that ahead of him lie betrayal. He knew that ahead of him lie his arrest, torture, crucifixion. He knew that tension was ahead. There was tension behind, there was tension ahead. So in that situation, you would wonder, what would you say? How would you express yourself? You would feel really justified to say, not right now. Don't talk to me right now. I am not in that space to listen. I am not in that space to give you some admonition. So, the carefully selected words to his disciples at this time is, these things I have spoken to you, that my joy might be in you, and that your joy might be full. I almost want to rewind that and think, hold on, let me just get this right. You know where you've been. You know where you're going. Nowhere in that narrative that I can see is there anything called joy. There is no joy there, but Christ speaks not only of joy that he has, but of joy that he is going to impart. Now that's not my head, that has piqued my attention, because I find that unbelievable. Far worse than anything that any of us may experience. So it makes me wonder, how do you handle extreme tension? How do you handle extreme pressures? How do you remain serene? How do you remain focused at that very moment when most of us would have imploded? What is it that makes us able to endure in times of tension? So I am not biblically trained and all of that. So very often you'll find me referring back to stuff that I understand. And one of the things that I understand is cycling. I understand cycling. But more specifically, I understand cycle racing. I love bike races. I love when the Tour de France is on, do not bother Ivan Browne. I'm busy watching the Tour. And the thing about that is, you know, those classic tours, if your eye is not trained, you don't really understand. You might not understand everything that's going on. You might think this guy's on a bike, They're all riding and they're all trying to get to that finish line first. That's what it's about. But cycling is a team sport. It's a team sport. And it's a sport whose whole currency is based on excruciating pain and suffering. If you are a professional cyclist, the idea of pain is just the currency in which you operate. That's not even the currency to win. It's just the currency to even just be in the game. It's pain and it is suffering. And you know, those that are most successful are often those who can function best, who can endure pain, who can keep going for no apparent glory for the longest. And the vast majority, here's the joke about cycling, on those big tours, the vast majority of those that are in the race know that they have zero chance of winning. They're not going into the race to win. They are just part of the peloton, the big group that you see, the big crowd. Those guys in there are not even involved in the idea of thinking that one day they will wear the yellow jersey. Pain and suffering without an immediate reward, but you love it. It seems quite ridiculous. But the whole thing is to just hold on. Each day when they're going through the Alps and the Pyrenees, they are holding on. And you don't want to get swept up by dropping off at the end and being swept up and then you're out of the race. They hold on day after day after day. For my 50th birthday present, my wife gave me one of the greatest gifts of all time, and she took me to Paris, to the Arc de Triomphe, to watch the Tour de France coming in. And it was the year that Browne won, the first English rider who had won for a long time. I have to say, I was there. I would love Linda forever for that. I was there watching them, and he started a whole kind of wave of English success. Bear in mind, we've never won the Tour before. And we had winners, we had Chris Browne, we had Garrett Thomas, we had various, but right now, the rider of interest, if you're an English person, is Tom Pidcock. So Tom, right now, is the great hope. Don't worry, I'm coming back. You can tell that I love cycling, right? I'm coming back. But one of the things, when he was described as one of the most exciting, most talented cyclists that we've had, he's already won an Olympic gold medal in mountain biking. He's already claimed the World Cyclocross title. He won one of the most ridiculous stages of the Tour de France on Alpe d'Huez in his rookie season. He is an incredible rider. But what really struck me was when they interviewed him and said, because normally people ride one thing, he rides them all. They said, well, how do you keep going? How have you become this? And he just said, because I love life and I love cycling. I just love cycling. So whether it's on cyclocross, whether it's on mountains, whether it's on the road, I just keep cycling. And the funny thing about it is, even now the team that he operates on, he is not their principal cyclist. He is what they call a domestique. His job is basically to do all the dog's body work. Go and get me a drink. Go and be a windbreaker while we're going through this difficult stage. Let me do all. His job is just to be one of the guys that's trying to help the team leader to get through. But he does it because he just loves cycling. And so I kind of thought about this love, this joy in the difficulties, in the pain. And I would suggest it's a pretty good definition of the kind of joy in service that Christ is talking about. So to love God and to love life, it's not about what we get, it's win or lose. To always serve others is the greatest goal, it is the greatest achievement, it is the ultimate victory over sin in your life. Even in the darkest of times, Jesus took comfort from the goal. He took comfort from the idea that this pain would lead to the reconciliation of God and man. The individual pain of the cyclist in the peloton doesn't matter, because ultimately it brings us closer to the goal of making sure that our team is successful. So there will be moments of darkness. There will be moments when you are climbing that hill where it feels impossible, where you can't see the front, you can't see what's happening elsewhere, but your job is just to continue to climb. And nowhere do we see this more clearly demonstrated in Christ's life than when he demonstrates it in that upper room passage that we read here. God gives us some learning points for just holding on. So how did Christ hold on in difficult circumstances? In that most difficult of circumstances, the passage gives us the clues of the things that Christ did. It talks about Christ resting in the Father. You see, Christ always held fast to God. If you read that passage in God, he always held fast to God. He drew his inner resource not from his own resilience, not from the fact of what he was going through, not from the fact of all the things that he had done or read, but actually from the fact that he was rooted in his Father. At the beginning of the chapter, Christ says, he gives that analogy of us being the branches and him being the vine. But if we carry that image a bit further, it talks about the vine dresser, the one who makes it all happen. If you like, the roots of the whole thing. And as the branches depended on the vine depends on the vine dresser. It depends on the roots. And Christ made sure that he was connected to his roots. In other words, the source of our life, the source of our power, the source of our courage, the source of our contentment, the things that bring us joy, the things that allow us to hold on, they're all rooted in God. That's where it is based. And when we are going through our difficult circumstances, when the seasons come where it feels like it's difficult to bear fruit, we are still connected to the vine. We are still a viable plant with our roots centered in God. So we will feel dark periods. We will feel times of disconnection. But we are still live plants rooted in God. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to listen to, almost revisit my youth, and there was a preacher that I really liked called Henry Rice, and I've not seen him for many, many years. And he came over to England. He did a camp meeting way back in the 90s, I think. And I went to hear him speak, and he came out, and I was expecting to see this frail man came out. And the man that walked out looked like the guy that I remembered. And I thought, oh, God has put a hedge around this man. He's protected him. He looks great. Life must be wonderful as this man of God has progressed in life. But then he started to talk. And as he talked, he had lost his wife. He had lost a son. He had fought illness. He had done all that. Life had not been smooth. But when he recounted his story, he just kept mentioning the fact that he was just holding on to God. He was still preaching because God continued to ask him to do what he was asked to do. In the summer school, you just spoke about the fact that you do what God asks you to do. He finds a new way for you. When you are going through difficult circumstances, when you are going through your trials, always remember you are rooted in God. And as long as you remember that, you will not feel disconnected, you will not feel alone, you will not feel isolated, you will not feel overwhelmed, because ultimately you are grounded in God. The next thing that we see, apart from resting in the Father, is that there was this element around Christ, and maybe it comes as a point of being rooted in the Father, truly rooted in the Father. But Christ had rehearsed those positive promises from God. They were never far from his thinking. He had something that he could rely on. He removed the negative and he focused his mind on the positive. I think it's really interesting that when we're looking for the promotion of peace and joy in our own heart, and we look at that in an upper room experience, one of the first things that Christ did was deal with Judas. It's one of the first things he did, not in a hostile or a terrible way. He knew what was going to happen. He knew that he was going to betray him. And he told Judas, he didn't say just stick around and hang here for a while and see what it's all about. He just turned to him and he said, you're going to have things to do. Go and do what you have to do and go and do it quickly. He got negativity out of that room as quickly as possible so that it would allow greater space for positivity to take place. He focused instead on the great and the purposeful and the powerful promises of God. And you can hear it when he said to his disciples, and many things, we go through that passage, listen to some of the things he says. It says, the Son of Man is now glorified. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Love one another. Believe in me, and you will do what I do, and you will do greater works than I do. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. I will not leave you or forsake you. I won't leave you desolate. Abide in me, and I will abide in you. No one can take my joy away from you. Positive affirmation after positive affirmation after positive affirmation. In those points where you are tempted to hold on, tempted not to hold on, do you have the positive promises to God at hand to remind you? Or do we just dwell on that negativity? There are those people that they call mood movers. Those people that walk into the room and they will just tell you everything that's wrong. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with them? What's wrong with the whole environment? And before you know it, you're just like, this really is bad. There should never be a Christian mood mover. We should be saying, do you understand, even in this worst situation, the goodness of God? Do you know what he has promised for you? Do you know what he wants to take place if you just hold on? Job had a few of those in his life. Remember when his friends came around to buoy him up in his tragic experience? Sucked out the mood. Well, it must have been Job. Yeah, it's terrible, man. We're here for you. But what is it that you did? What's that thing that you did? God must be mad at you. That's why those things are mood movers. Christ didn't have those in the room. He had people that might have been discouraged. He might have had people that might have been depressed. But he lifted them, knowing that God has great things in store for you. And when we're going through our difficult times, when we're going through our dark places, we have to remember that God has great things in store for us. It's part of the process. And the other thing that we see from that passage is that in those moments of despair, in those moments of pressure, in those moments when things were difficult, Christ relied on prayer. And if Christ needed prayer, how much more so do we need it? When things were dark below, Christ looked up. It's interesting, isn't it, that sometimes you get to watch these nature programs. We often watch the nature programs, and you see the way that the animal kingdom get over difficult problems. And one of the ways that I see, a couple of ways that I see, is that if you've got a bird and it's managed to find a nut, it can't crack that nut with its beak. What does it do? It flies as high as it can possibly go and simply drops the nut. Drops the nut. So when it wants to get to where it wants to, it realizes that the answer to tough problems in life is to increase your altitude. To increase your altitude. So that when things get tough and tensions come, We need to look up to our Father in prayer. Back with the Apollo 13 story back in 1970, remember there was that time, 205,000 miles away from home, and then you get that call that you dread. Houston, we have a problem. We have a problem? 205,000 miles away from home? That's a problem. And it was interesting that even though the technology wasn't its best at that time, there was still technology in that space capsule. But inside of that space capsule, Houston didn't say to them, jiggle this knob, jiggle that knob, to get to re-entry. It didn't say that. It said, look to the stars and direct yourself to that star point, and we will calculate your re-entry from that star that you see. And in that time, Houston called together prayer leaders and the country, the world, prayed for the re-entry of that. And they showed a picture on the front of Time magazine that is that call of the minister praying in Houston for the safe return. And when they come back and they get back safely, there is that picture of them with the church leaders praying together about their safe return. Even in those darkest of moments, even in those places where it's pitch black and hopeless, where you feel like you're over 200,000 miles away from where you need to be, God says, come to me. Come to me. So prayer and the nature of our prayers will change in those difficult places. God reminds us that he's ever present for us. He says there that even though things are tough, even though things seem hopeless, these things I have spoken to you still, that my joy may be in you and your joy may be full. That is the star that we are guiding ourselves. That is the promise that God has given us. That's what we ask for in prayer when we seek him in our difficult times. God has a perfect track record. This is what I just want to finish with. God has a perfect track record. He's always been faithful. He's always been true. And in the midst of pain or sadness or difficult or tears or questions, I have been able to hang on to this profound word of truth from God. And that is that same God that has begun a good work in all of us will continue until it is finally finished on that glorious day when Christ returns. God doesn't need the job half done. We don't have to pretend to be perfect. We don't have to pretend that we have it all together or that we have all the answer. What we need to know is God is holding us still in those difficult circumstances. So I'm just going to leave you with a couple of things just to help you if any of you are going through difficult circumstances, challenges in life. The Word of God is full of admonition that will help you. If you look in Isaiah chapter 41 verse 10, it says that we can trust God to hold us and all of our missing pieces. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be right. We don't have to have everything sorted. God will hold us in those difficult places. In Colossians chapter 1 verse 17, when life feels out of control, Colossians reminds us that it isn't, because God is ultimately in control. In Psalm 51 verse 17, when life is messy, remember that God is over everything that is messed up. In Matthew chapter 28 verse 20, when you feel afraid and alone and it seems as if God is silent, he is still with you in your pain. He is still moving in your life. We are never alone. I guess what I'm just trying to say is I'm learning as I go along with all of those difficult stories and all of those things that happen in my life to be open with God, to be vulnerable with God, to be still and to know that he is there. Just hold on. Amen.